The downfall of the council began with a single spark, a rebellion fueled by courage, sacrifice, and an unyielding desire for justice. After the successful takedown of Project Overlord, the Resistance Alliance became a beacon of hope for millions. Across the solar system, the Council's lies had been exposed, its grip on power weakened, and its days numbered. But the fight was far from over. Ethan, Mia, and Daniel worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. They knew that dismantling the Council required more than just disabling one program or raiding a few supply depots. It meant creating a new system to replace the old one. In secret meetings held in hidden bunkers and abandoned warehouses, they began drafting plans for a provisional government. This new leadership would represent all people equally, whether they lived on Earth, Titan, Europa, or any other colony. Rachel's sacrifice weighed heavily on their minds. Her bravery had inspired countless others to join the cause, but her absence left a void that could never truly be filled. To honor her memory, the Alliance named their movement Rachel's Dawn, a symbol of the brighter future they were fighting for. Posters of Rachel appeared in cities and colonies, her image accompanied by the words, "Freedom is worth fighting for." The Council, desperate to maintain control, launched a final brutal crackdown. Enforcer squads patrolled streets, arresting anyone suspected of supporting the rebellion. Entire neighborhoods were placed under curfew, and dissent was met with swift punishment. Yet, even as fear spread, so did defiance. Families hid rebels in their homes, workers sabotaged council operations, and activists continued spreading messages of resistance through underground networks. One evening, Ethan stood at the edge of a crowded square in New Terra, watching as protesters gathered beneath a massive holographic projection of Rachel's face. Speakers took turns addressing the crowd, urging them to stand firm against the council's oppression. Ethan felt a surge of pride as he listened to their voices, knowing that Rachel's spirit lived on in every person who refused to back down. Mia, meanwhile, worked behind the scenes analyzing data and coordinating with leaders from various colonies. She helped organize strikes, protests, and acts of civil disobedience, ensuring that the rebellion remained united despite the challenges. Her calm demeanor and sharp mind earned her the trust of those around her, and she quickly became one of the movement's most respected figures. Daniel focused on training volunteers, teaching them how to defend themselves and strike strategically. He understood that the rebellion needed more than passion. It needed discipline. Under his guidance, ordinary citizens transformed into skilled fighters, ready to take on the Council's enforcers. Though the losses were painful, each victory brought them closer to their goal. As weeks turned into months, the Council's authority crumbled. Colonies declared independence, refusing to obey the corrupt leaders who had betrayed them. On Earth, mass protests paralyzed major cities, forcing businesses to close and governments to listen. Even some Council loyalists defected, unable to justify supporting an institution built on greed and cruelty. Finally, the tipping point came. A group of former Council members, disillusioned by the atrocities they had witnessed, approached the Resistance Alliance with a proposal. They offered to help negotiate a peaceful transition of power, provided the Alliance agreed to include representatives from all factions, not just rebels, but also reform-minded individuals willing to rebuild society. Ethan, Mia, and Daniel debated the offer carefully. Trusting former Council members was risky, but ignoring the opportunity could prolong the conflict. Ultimately, they decided to accept, believing that compromise was necessary to achieve lasting peace. The negotiations took place aboard a neutral space station orbiting Mars, far from the reach of both sides. Representatives from the rebellion, the colonies, and the Council sat together at a long table, their faces tense but hopeful. Ethan spoke on behalf of the Resistance Alliance, his voice steady as he outlined their demands: transparency, equality, and accountability. After days of heated discussions, an agreement was reached. The Council would dissolve, and a provisional government would take its place. This new body would consist of elected officials from every corner of human civilization, ensuring that no single group held unchecked power. Resources would be distributed fairly, and efforts would focus on rebuilding communities devastated by years of neglect. When news of the agreement reached the public, celebrations erupted across the solar system. People danced in the streets, hugged strangers, and cheered for the dawn of a new era. In New Haven, Sarah Bennett addressed a jubilant crowd, tears streaming down her face as she spoke about Rachel's legacy. "She gave everything for us," Sarah said. "Now it's our turn to build the world she dreamed of." Ethan returned to Earth, where he dedicated himself to designing systems that promoted sustainability and fairness. Mia joined a team of analysts working to root out corruption and ensure transparency in the new government. Daniel traveled between colonies, helping establish local councils and train community leaders. Together they worked to create a society where everyone had a voice and no one was left behind. But the scars of the past remained. Many families mourned, loved ones lost during the rebellion, and rebuilding shattered communities would take time. Still, there was hope, a belief that humanity could learn from its mistakes and forge a better path forward. In the years that followed, stories of the rebellion became legend. Children grew up hearing tales of courage and sacrifice, of ordinary people rising up to challenge tyranny. Statues of Rachel Monroe were erected in cities and colonies, reminders of the woman who had ignited a revolution. Her name became synonymous with resilience, a testament to the power of unity in the face of adversity. And so, amidst the stars, humanity began anew. The fury that had once consumed them transformed into determination, a shared commitment to building a future defined not by greed or fear, but by compassion and cooperation. It wasn't perfect, and challenges lay ahead. But for the first time in generations, people dared to dream of a world where everyone belonged. Ethan often found himself standing on the balcony of his apartment, gazing at the sprawling megacity below. Gone were the shadows of oppression. In their place stood a society learning to heal. He thought of Rachel, of Mia, of Daniel, and of all those who had fought alongside him. Their journey had been long and difficult, but it had led them here, to a place where freedom wasn't just a dream, but a reality worth protecting. As the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan smiled. Humanity's fury had erupted, and from its ashes a new dawn had risen. The Resistance Alliance gathered in a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of Earth Prime, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of computer screens and handheld devices. The air was thick with tension as Ethan, Mia, Rachel, and Daniel reviewed the final details of their plan to infiltrate the Council's central command. Project Overlord loomed over them like a shadow, a threat so grave that failure was not an option. Ethan stood at the center of the room, pointing to a holographic map projected onto a nearby wall. "This is the layout of the Central Command," he explained, his voice steady despite the weight of the mission ahead. "There are 3 main checkpoints, 2 manned by enforcers and 1 controlled by automated defenses. If we can disable the security systems, we can get inside without triggering alarms." Mia nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she worked on disabling the surveillance cameras surrounding the facility. "I've already hacked into their external network," she said. "Once we're inside, I'll keep the cameras looped so they won't see us moving through the corridors." Daniel stepped forward, his arms crossed as he studied the map. "What about the guards? Even if we bypass the cameras, they'll still be patrolling the area." Rachel spoke up, her tone confident. "We'll split into 2 teams. One team will create a distraction near the front entrance to draw the guards away. The other team will move in quietly through a service tunnel. That should give us enough time to reach the control room." Everyone agreed it was a risky plan, but they had no choice. The Council's central command was a fortress, designed to withstand any attack. To succeed, they would need precision, teamwork, and a little bit of luck. Hours later, under the cover of darkness, the Alliance moved into position. The first team, led by Daniel, consisted of volunteers armed with makeshift weapons and smoke grenades. Their job was simple yet dangerous: cause enough chaos to divert the Enforcers' attention. The second team, led by Rachel, included Ethan, Mia, and a few trusted allies. They would slip through the service tunnel and make their way to the control room where Project Overlord's core system was housed. As Daniel's team approached the front entrance, they launched their assault. Smoke bombs exploded in bright bursts, filling the air with thick clouds. The sound of gunfire echoed through the night as Enforcers rushed to respond, leaving the rear of the facility vulnerable. It was exactly what Rachel's team needed. Using the confusion to their advantage, Rachel and her group entered the service tunnel. The narrow passageway was damp and poorly lit, its walls lined with exposed pipes and wires. Ethan carried a small device that emitted a low hum, jamming any sensors that might detect their presence. Mia followed closely behind, her tablet displaying a live feed of the security camera feeds she had hacked earlier. "Keep moving," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of battle. "We don't have much time." They reached the end of the tunnel and emerged into a maintenance corridor. The path ahead was clear, thanks to Mia's efforts to disable the cameras. Still, they moved cautiously, knowing that even the slightest mistake could alert the Council to their presence. Finally, they arrived at the control room. The door was locked, but Ethan quickly went to work, attaching a small device to the keypad. Within moments, the lock clicked open, and the team slipped inside. The control room was a maze of blinking lights, monitors, and servers. At its center stood a massive console connected to Project Overlord's core system. Ethan immediately got to work, plugging his laptop into the console while Mia monitored the data streams flowing through the network. "This is it," Ethan muttered, his eyes scanning the code scrolling across his screen. "If I can upload this virus, it'll shut down the neural implant program permanently." Rachel kept watch by the door, her heart pounding as she listened for any signs of approaching Enforcers. She knew they were running out of time. Daniel's distraction couldn't last forever. "How long will it take?" she asked, glancing back at Ethan. 5 minutes, he replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Maybe less if I don't hit any roadblocks." Suddenly, the sound of boots echoed down the hallway. Rachel spun around, raising her weapon, as a group of Enforcers appeared at the far end of the corridor. "We've got company!" she shouted. Mia grabbed a portable EMP device from her bag and activated it, sending a pulse of energy that temporarily disabled the Enforcers' equipment. The soldiers stumbled, disoriented, giving the team precious seconds to act. "Hurry, Ethan!" Rachel urged, firing warning shots to keep the Enforcers at bay. "I'm almost done," Ethan replied, sweat dripping from his brow. His hands trembled as he typed the final lines of code. On the monitor, a progress bar crept toward completion. Outside, Daniel's team fought valiantly to hold off the Council's forces. The distraction had served its purpose, but the Enforcers were closing in. Bullets ricocheted off walls, and the air was thick with smoke and shouting. Despite being outnumbered, Daniel refused to retreat. He knew the fate of the mission and possibly humanity depended on buying Ethan and Mia enough time. Back in the control room, the progress bar finally reached 100%. Ethan slammed his fist on the enter key, uploading the virus into the system. A cascade of error messages filled the monitors as Project Overlord's core began to shut down. "We did it!" Ethan exclaimed, relief washing over him. But their victory was short-lived. The Enforcers regrouped and charged toward the control room, their weapons drawn. Rachel fired back, determined to protect her friends. "Go!" she yelled at Ethan and Mia. "Get out of here!" Ethan hesitated, torn between staying to fight and escaping with the others. But Mia grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the exit. "She's right! We have to go now!" Reluctantly, Ethan followed Mia out of the control room, leaving Rachel to hold off the advancing enforcers. As they disappeared into the maintenance corridor, Rachel turned to face her enemies, her weapon raised defiantly. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. Every shot she fired was a statement, a declaration that humanity would not bow to tyranny. Meanwhile, Ethan and Mia retraced their steps through the service tunnel, their hearts racing as they heard the distant sounds of gunfire fade behind them. When they emerged into the cool night air, they found Daniel waiting for them, battered but alive. "Where's Rachel?" he demanded, his voice strained with worry. "She stayed behind to cover our escape," Ethan admitted, guilt heavy in his chest. Daniel clenched his fists but said nothing. There was no time to dwell on what had happened. They had to regroup and prepare for the next phase of the rebellion. As dawn broke over the horizon, news of the raid spread throughout the solar system. Reports confirmed that Project Overlord had been neutralized, dealing a devastating blow to the Council's plans for total control. Celebrations erupted in colonies and cities alike, with people cheering the bravery of the resistance fighters who had risked everything to stop the program. But amidst the celebrations, there was also mourning. Word of Rachel's sacrifice reached her supporters, sparking an outpouring of grief and gratitude. Her courage became a rallying cry, inspiring others to continue the fight against the Council. For Ethan, Mia, and Daniel, the loss of Rachel was a painful reminder of the cost of freedom. Yet, they knew she wouldn't want them to give up. With renewed determination, they vowed to honor her memory by seeing the rebellion through to the end. The Council, meanwhile, teetered on the brink of collapse. Public outrage over Project Overlord had reached a boiling point, forcing even some loyalists to question their allegiance. Protests grew larger and more organized, demanding accountability and reform. The once unshakable institution was crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. In the days that followed, the Resistance Alliance seized the momentum, launching coordinated attacks on key council facilities and redistributing stolen resources to struggling communities. The rebellion had become a force to be reckoned with, united by a shared vision of justice and equality. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Humanity's fury had erupted, and it would not be extinguished until the Council's grip on power was broken for good. The rebellion was growing stronger, but it came at a cost. The Council's enforcers were relentless, hunting down anyone suspected of aiding the resistance. Homes were raided, families torn apart, and innocent lives destroyed in the name of maintaining control. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, Ethan, Mia, Rachel, and their allies refused to back down. They knew the stakes were too high to give up now. Ethan and Mia had spent countless nights huddled over their computers, analyzing data and planning their next move. Their successful infiltration of the Council's database had been a turning point, crippling the organization's ability to coordinate its forces effectively. But they also knew it was only a temporary victory. The Council would recover, regroup, and strike back harder than before. To truly win, they needed more than just sabotage. They needed unity. Rachel, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to rally support for the cause. Her speeches inspired people across the solar system, from Earth's crowded cities to the isolated colonies on distant moons. She traveled between settlements, meeting with leaders and organizing protests. Her message was simple. Humanity deserved better. No one should suffer while others lived in luxury. Together, they could overthrow the corrupt council and build a fairer future. One evening, as Rachel addressed a crowd in New Haven, she noticed a familiar face in the audience, Sarah Bennett. Sarah had been released from custody after weeks of imprisonment, her body weakened but her spirit unbroken. Rachel rushed to her side, embracing her friend tightly. "I thought I'd never see you again," Rachel said, tears welling up in her eyes. "They couldn't break me," Sarah replied, her voice firm despite her frail appearance. "Not when I know what we're fighting for." Sarah's return was a morale boost for the movement. She shared stories of her time in captivity, detailing the Council's brutal tactics and inspiring others to resist. Her courage became a symbol of hope, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, resilience could prevail. Back on Earth, Ethan and Mia met with Daniel Harper to discuss their next steps. The safe house had become their headquarters, a place where plans were made and alliances formed. Daniel had proven invaluable, using his military experience to train volunteers in combat and strategy. He taught them how to handle weapons, set traps, and evade capture. Though many of the recruits were ordinary citizens with no prior training, their determination made up for their lack of skill. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Daniel said during one of their strategy sessions. "Something big enough to shake their confidence." Ethan nodded. "We've already disrupted their communications and logistics. What else can we target?" Mia leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with an idea. "What about their propaganda? If we can expose their lies to the entire solar system, we can turn public opinion against them completely." Rachel loved the idea. Using encrypted channels, she coordinated with activists on Earth to gather footage of the Council's atrocities, images of starving colonies, overcrowded prisons, and violent crackdowns on peaceful protests. They edited the clips into a powerful video, narrated by Rachel herself, and prepared to broadcast it across every available platform. But getting the message out wouldn't be easy. The Council controlled most media outlets, censoring dissenting voices and spreading misinformation. To bypass these restrictions, Ethan and Mia hacked into public communication networks, hijacking live broadcasts and streaming the video directly to millions of screens. The impact was immediate. Viewers watched in horror as the truth unfolded before their eyes. Families gathered around their devices, stunned by the scale of the Council's betrayal. On Earth, workers walked off their jobs in protest. In the colonies, miners refused to extract resources destined for elite districts. Even some Council loyalists began questioning their allegiance, unable to ignore the overwhelming evidence of corruption. The Council responded with fury. Enforcer squads swept through cities and colonies, arresting anyone suspected of involvement in the broadcast. But the damage had been done. The rebellion had gained unprecedented momentum, and there was no turning back. With public support surging, Ethan, Mia, Rachel, and Daniel decided it was time to escalate their efforts. They formed the Resistance Alliance, a coalition of rebels, activists, and former Council employees willing to fight for change. Each member brought unique skills to the table: Ethan's technical expertise, Mia's analytical mind, Rachel's leadership, and Daniel's tactical knowledge. Together, they planned their boldest operation yet, a direct assault on a Council supply depot holding vital resources intended for elite districts. The depot was located in a heavily guarded facility on Earth Prime, making it a risky target. But the Alliance saw an opportunity to redistribute the stolen goods to struggling colonies, proving that they weren't just fighting against oppression, they were fighting for justice. Preparations for the raid took weeks. Volunteers trained tirelessly under Daniel's guidance, learning how to breach security systems and neutralize threats. Ethan and Mia worked on disabling surveillance cameras and hacking into the depot's automated defenses. Rachel coordinated with colony leaders, ensuring that transport ships were ready to receive and distribute the supplies once the mission succeeded. On the night of the operation, the team assembled at a secret location near the depot. Tension crackled in the air as they reviewed the plan one last time. Everyone understood the risks. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. But they also knew that success could galvanize the rebellion like never before. As the clock struck midnight, the team moved into position. Using stolen Council vehicles, they approached the facility undetected, thanks to Ethan and Mia's interference with the security systems. Once inside, they encountered minimal resistance. The Council hadn't anticipated such a bold attack. Working quickly, they loaded crates of food, medicine, and raw materials onto waiting transport ships. News of the raid spread rapidly. Colonies that had been on the brink of collapse received life-saving supplies, reigniting their hope for a better future. On Earth, the Council scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing statements condemning the theft and vowing to punish those responsible. But the damage to their reputation was irreparable. More and more people joined the rebellion, swelling its ranks with fresh recruits. The Council retaliated with brutal force, deploying enforcer squads to crush any sign of dissent. Protests were met with violence, and suspected rebels faced harsh punishments. Yet the resistance remained undeterred. Every act of cruelty only fueled their determination to see the Council fall. Amidst the chaos, Ethan and Mia uncovered something even more alarming, a classified project known as Project Overlord. Hidden deep within the Council's archives, it detailed plans to implant neural chips into the population, allowing the Council to control thoughts and actions remotely. If activated, the project would strip humanity of its free will, ensuring absolute obedience. Realizing the stakes, the Resistance Alliance shifted its focus. They knew they had to disable Project Overlord before it could be implemented. It was a daunting task, requiring them to infiltrate the Council's central command, a fortress-like structure protected by layers of security. But failure wasn't an option. Humanity's freedom depended on their success. As they prepared for the mission, Rachel addressed the team, her voice filled with resolve. "This isn't just about us anymore," she said. "It's about everyone who's ever been betrayed, oppressed, or silenced. We have the chance to change everything, to create a world where no one has to live in fear. Let's make it count." With those words, the Alliance embarked on their most dangerous mission yet, knowing that the fate of humanity rested in their hands. The leak happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of day when most people were too busy with their routines to notice anything unusual. Ethan and Mia had spent weeks preparing for this moment, double-checking every file, encrypting every message, and ensuring that their identities remained hidden. They knew the risks. Betraying the Global Unity Council was like poking a sleeping dragon, but they also knew they couldn't stay silent any longer. Using a network of trusted contacts, they uploaded the stolen documents to an underground server, accessible only through encrypted channels. Within hours, the files began circulating among activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens who had grown suspicious of the Council's actions. The evidence was damning. Detailed records showing how resources meant for struggling colonies were rerouted to elite districts on Earth, along with memos from high-ranking officials discussing plans to abandon entire populations. At first, the reaction was muted. Many people dismissed the documents as fake or exaggerated, unwilling to believe that their leaders could be so cruel. But as more details emerged, skepticism turned to anger. Protests erupted in cities across Earth and in colonies scattered throughout the solar system. In New Haven, Rachel Monroe stood at the forefront of the growing movement, her fiery speeches, rallying supporters and drawing attention to the Council's betrayal. Rachel had always been a natural leader. Born and raised on Titan's moon, she understood the struggles of life in the outer colonies better than anyone. Her family had worked hard to survive, farming hydroponic crops and trading goods to make ends meet. When the Council announced its decision to cut off support for struggling colonies, Rachel felt the sting of betrayal deeply. She knew it wasn't just about resources. It was about dignity, about being treated as equals rather than expendable assets. With the leaked documents as proof, Rachel organized mass demonstrations in New Haven. Thousands of people gathered in the colony's central plaza, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Justice for All" and "No More Lies." Rachel addressed the crowd from a makeshift stage, her voice amplified by speakers rigged to a nearby drone. "They think we're weak," she shouted, her words echoing through the plaza. They think we'll sit back and let them take everything from us, but we're not weak. We're strong. Together, we can fight back." Her speech electrified the crowd, inspiring them to take action. Similar protests broke out in other colonies, each one fueled by the same sense of outrage and determination. On Earth, however, the response was more subdued. The Council controlled the media outlets, spinning stories to downplay the unrest and portray the protesters as troublemakers. But cracks were beginning to show even there, as whispers of discontent spread among the working class and disenfranchised communities. Ethan and Mia watched the growing rebellion from their safe house, a small apartment tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. They had gone into hiding after leaking the documents, knowing the Council would stop at nothing to silence them. Daniel Harper, a former soldier turned mechanic, had agreed to shelter them after hearing about their mission. He was a gruff man in his late 30s, with a scar running down one cheek and a deep distrust of authority. Years of serving under the Council's command had left him disillusioned, and he saw the uprising as an opportunity to right past wrongs. "You two really stepped in it this time," Daniel said one evening as they gathered around the kitchen table. "The Council doesn't forgive traitors." "We didn't have a choice," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Fears. If we hadn't acted, no one would have known the truth." Daniel nodded slowly, respecting their courage. "Well, you've got my help now. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." As the days passed, the Council struck back with brutal efficiency. Enforcer squads, elite units tasked with maintaining order, descended upon suspected rebel strongholds, arresting anyone associated with the uprising. Homes were raided, families torn apart, and dissenters disappeared without a trace. Among those captured was Sarah Bennett, a close friend of Rachel's who had risked everything to aid the resistance. Her arrest sent shock waves through the movement, but it also hardened their resolve. Back in New Haven, Rachel refused to back down. She called for a day of global solidarity, urging people everywhere to join the fight against the Council. Using encrypted communication networks, she coordinated with leaders from other colonies, planning simultaneous acts of defiance. The goal was simple: overwhelm the Council's forces and force them to acknowledge the people's demands. On the designated day, the resistance launched its largest operation yet. Protesters blocked major highways, shut down factories, and occupied government buildings. In space, miners staged walkouts, halting the flow of raw materials essential to the Council's operations. Even on Earth, where the Council's influence was strongest, workers went on strike, crippling key industries. The Council responded with overwhelming force. Enforcers deployed riot control drones, firing tear gas and rubber bullets into crowds of unarmed civilians. News outlets reported violent clashes, though the true extent of the bloodshed was kept hidden from the public. Despite the crackdown, the rebellion continued to grow, fueled by a shared sense of injustice and a refusal to give up. Amidst the chaos, Ethan and Mia worked tirelessly behind the scenes. From their safe house, they monitored the Council's communications, looking for weaknesses to exploit. They discovered that the Council relied heavily on a centralized database to coordinate its operations, a potential target for sabotage. With Daniel's help, they devised a plan to infiltrate the system and disrupt the Council's ability to respond effectively. Their first attempt ended in failure. A team of hackers sent by the Resistance managed to breach the database but triggered an alarm that alerted the Council's security forces. Several members of the team were captured, and the Council tightened its defenses, making future attacks nearly impossible. Undeterred, Ethan and Mia regrouped and came up with a new strategy. Instead of targeting the database directly, they focused on creating diversions to draw the Council's attention elsewhere. Working with Rachel and other leaders, they orchestrated a series of decoy operations designed to stretch the Council's resources thin. These included fake leaks, claiming that rebels planned to attack specific locations, forcing the Council to deploy enforcers to areas where no threat existed. While the Council scrambled to respond to these false alarms, Ethan and Mia prepared for their real mission. They recruited a small group of trusted allies, including Daniel, to carry out the operation. Each member had a specific role to play, from hacking into surveillance systems to disabling security checkpoints. The plan was risky, but they knew it was their best chance to strike a blow against the Council. On the night of the operation, tension hung thick in the air. Ethan and Mia sat side by side in front of their computers, guiding the team through every step of the mission. As the infiltration began, they held their breath, praying that their efforts wouldn't be in vain. In New Haven, Rachel waited anxiously for news of the operation's success. She knew the stakes were high. If they failed, the Council would retaliate with even greater ferocity. But if they succeeded, it could tip the balance in favor of the rebellion. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, a message appeared on Ethan's screen. Access granted. The team had breached the Council's database, planting viruses that would cripple their ability to coordinate responses. It was a small victory, but one that gave hope to millions fighting for change. As dawn broke over the horizon, the rebellion celebrated its latest triumph. For the first time in years, the Council's grip on power seemed shaky. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but the spark of resistance had been lit, and it burned brighter with each passing day. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling megacity of New Terra. Towering skyscrapers pierced the sky, their glass facades shimmering like polished jewels under the fading light. The streets below buzzed with activity. Hovercars zipped through designated lanes, drones delivered packages to waiting hands, and holographic advertisements flickered in every direction. Humanity had reached a golden age, or so it seemed. Ethan Carter stood on the balcony of his apartment, watching the city pulse with life. He was an engineer, one of the many brilliant minds who helped keep the machinery of this utopia running smoothly. His job at the Global Unity Council, GUC, involved analyzing data streams and ensuring that resources flowed efficiently throughout the solar system. It was tedious work, but Ethan took pride in knowing he contributed to humanity's progress. At least that's what he used to believe. Inside the apartment, his younger sister Mia sat hunched over her desk, surrounded by glowing screens filled with lines of code and streams of numbers. She worked as a data analyst for one of the Council's sub-offices, poring over reports that most people would find mind-numbingly dull. But Mia had always been good at spotting patterns, even in the smallest details. And lately, something didn't feel right. "Ethan," she called out, her voice tinged with frustration. "Come look at this." Ethan stepped back inside, closing the sliding door behind him. The cool air of the apartment contrasted sharply with the humid warmth outside. He walked over to where Mia was seated and leaned in to examine her screen. Rows of figures scrolled past, each representing shipments of goods sent to various colonies scattered across the solar system. "What am I looking at?" Ethan asked, squinting at the numbers. "These are resource allocation logs," Mia explained, pointing to specific entries. "See here? These shipments were supposed to go to Colony Delta 7, but they're marked as rerouted to Earth Prime instead." Ethan frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Delta 7 has been struggling for months. They need those supplies more than anyone." "I know," Mia said, tapping another line on the screen. "And it's not just Delta 7. Look at these other entries. Shipments meant for Titan Station, Europa Base, and half a dozen other colonies have all been diverted. Every single one ends up somewhere on Earth." Ethan straightened up, his brow furrowed in thought. "Are you sure about this? Maybe there's a mistake in the system?" Mia shook her head. "I've double-checked everything. These aren't errors, they're deliberate changes. Someone high up is tampering with the records." A heavy silence settled between them. The implications of what Mia had uncovered weighed heavily on both their shoulders. If true, it meant that the council wasn't just mismanaging resources. They were actively stealing from the very people they claimed to protect. Later that evening, Ethan couldn't shake off the unease gnawing at him. He decided to dig deeper into the matter, accessing restricted files using his clearance level. What he found confirmed Mia's suspicions. Detailed reports revealed that massive amounts of food, medicine, and raw materials were being stockpiled in secret warehouses located in elite districts on Earth. Meanwhile, countless colonies were left to fend for themselves, suffering shortages and hardship. As Ethan sifted through the evidence, anger began to simmer within him. How could the council justify such blatant greed? Didn't they realize how many lives depended on those resources? He thought about the families living in cramped habitats on distant moons, struggling to survive while the wealthy elite enjoyed luxuries beyond imagination. The next morning, Ethan met Mia for breakfast at a small cafe near their building. Neither of them spoke much as they sipped their coffee, lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "We can't let this slide," he said firmly. "If we don't do something, no one will." Mia nodded, her expression grim. "But what can we do? We're just two people against the entire council." "We start by spreading the word," Ethan replied. "We gather as much proof as we can and share it with others. There are plenty of people out there who care about justice. They just need to know the truth." Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Mia worked tirelessly to compile evidence of the council's corruption. They copied files onto secure drives, encrypted messages, and reached out to trusted contacts within the resistance movement, a loose network of individuals opposed to the council's oppressive rule. One name kept coming up: Rachel Monroe, a fiery activist from New Haven, a colony orbiting Saturn's moon Titan. Rachel had already gained notoriety for organizing protests against the council's policies. Her speeches resonated deeply with those affected by the growing inequality between Earth and its colonies. When Ethan and Mia reached out to her, she wasted no time responding. Through encrypted channels, they shared their findings, and Rachel immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "This is bigger than anything we've dealt with before," Rachel told them during a virtual meeting. "If we expose this, it could bring the whole system crashing down." "But it's dangerous," Ethan warned. "The council won't take this lying down. Once they realize we're onto them, they'll come after us." Rachel smiled grimly. "Let them try. We've got nothing left to lose." Back on Earth, tensions continued to rise. The council announced its decision to abandon several outer colonies due to resource constraints, citing unsustainable living conditions and dwindling supplies. The announcement sparked outrage among those affected, fueling protests and acts of defiance. Many suspected foul play but lacked concrete evidence to challenge the official narrative. Ethan and Mia knew better. They understood that the council's claims were lies designed to mask their greed. With Rachel's help, they prepared to leak the documents to the public, hoping to ignite a firestorm of dissent. But as they finalized their plans, they couldn't ignore the risks involved. Betraying the council meant putting targets on their backs, not just for themselves, but for everyone they cared about. One night, as Ethan stared at the glowing screen of his computer, he felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about reclaiming humanity's future. For too long, the council had manipulated and controlled, prioritizing profit over compassion. Now, it was time for the people to fight back. Little did Ethan and Mia know their actions would set off a chain reaction that would change the course of history forever.